heavy iron gate slammed behind him with a loud KPA, and Cunnel froze, his hand still carrying a nylon bag of suya and chilled malt. He blinked twice, then pushed the gate gently, but it didn't move. His mother-in-law had locked it from inside. The compound light threw a long shadow of her wrapper across the floor, and her voice cut through the night like blade. "Cunnel, no be today you go enter this house again." His chest tightened. The Harmattan breeze slapped his face, mixing with the sharp pepper aroma of the suya that was suddenly useless in his hand. He cleared his throat, his voice shaking. "Mama, a beg open. Wetin I do again?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, the sound of a chair scraping the cement echoed, followed by the hiss of slippers dragging away. Cunnel's stomach knotted. This was more than ordinary quarrel. Something dangerous was already in motion inside his own home. The night swallowed him, leaving only the distant bark of dogs and the faint hum of a generator from next street. Cunnel paced in front of the locked gate, his heart racing like Danfo driver on Lagos Express. His mind darted back to the last argument with his wife, Ifeoma, how she accused him of coming home late and smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He had laughed it off, calling her paranoid. But now with the gate locked against him, her mother's words heavy in the air, he wondered if that perfume had become evidence. He tried the small pedestrian gate, rattled it hard, but it refused to open. The metallic clang echoed loud, alerting neighbors who peeked from their verandas. Embarrassment burned his skin, yet fear grew sharper. Why would Mama take such bold step? He knew she was strict, but this felt personal, like she was guarding a secret inside. As the minutes dragged, the nylon bag grew sweaty in his palm, the cold malt turning lukewarm. Suddenly, he heard a giggle from upstairs balcony. The kind of laughter that cut deep because it wasn't from a stranger. His eyes shot up, and there in the faint yellow bulb stood Ifeoma, his wife, wrapped loosely in a shawl. Beside her, half hidden in shadow, was a tall man whose hand brushed hers casually, almost possessively. Cunnel's throat went dry. His heart pounded louder than the neighbor's generator. Mama's voice floated from inside again, calm this time, but sharp. "Cunnel, sometimes shame day teach man lesson better than cane." The gate remained locked, his own house suddenly a prison he couldn't enter, and the people inside were no longer his alone. Cunnel pressed his ear against the iron gate, listening for footsteps, but all he caught was the fading shuffle of rubber slippers and the faint echo of laughter from above. His breath came fast, clouding in the cold night air, mixing with the sharp sting of dust. He thought about climbing the wall, but the jagged bottles cemented at the top gleamed under the bulb like teeth waiting to chew flesh. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 3 missed calls from his best friend. Tunned, but he ignored them, ashamed to explain what was happening. "Mama!" he shouted again, pounding the gate with his fist, his voice cracking. From the balcony, the shawl slipped from Ifeoma's shoulder as she leaned closer to whisper into the ear of the tall man beside her. Cunnel's chest burned. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination, but the sight was sharp and real, like a blade against his ribs. Cunnel's heart hammered as he paced in front of the compound like a trapped goat. His sandals scraped the cement, his body restless with rage, confusion, and fear. He tried circling the house, slipping into the narrow alley that led behind the kitchen wall, but the ground was littered with broken bottles, and one cut through his skin. He hissed in pain, blood mixing with dust as he limped forward, determined to find another way in. From the corner, a neighbor's door creaked open, and a woman in a yellow wrapper peered out, torchlight flickering across her worried face. "Cunnel, stop this thing," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the balcony. "Dem day look you like fool." A small dog barked behind her, snapping at the air. Cunnel swallowed hard, shame prickling his skin, but he kept moving. He wasn't going to let them humiliate him in his own home. Not tonight. Then, as if fate had been waiting, Cunnel spotted a folded piece of paper sticking out beneath a loose stone by the gate. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, unwrapping it slowly under the dim glow of his phone light. The words on the note stabbed at him harder than Mama's insults. "Cunnel, truth always finds night. Go before it swallows you." His breath caught, his eyes burning as if pepper smoke had rushed into them. Above him, Ifeoma's silhouette lingered at the balcony, her braid catching the wind. She pressed her hand against her lips and turned away quickly, while the tall, bearded man stepped deeper into shadow. Cunnel's throat tightened. Betrayal was no longer a rumor. It was handwriting staring him in the face. And Mama, standing calmly by the bulb, only watched with a silence that felt louder than any scream. Cunnel's knees weakened as he stared at the note again, reading it over and over, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But they didn't. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, almost mocking him. He clenched his fist around the paper until it crumpled, his jaw tight with anger. "So this trap all along?" he muttered under his breath, voice breaking. Above him, the balcony light flickered, and he caught a clearer view of the tall man's hand brushing against Ifeoma's waist. The way she didn't push it away made Cunnel's chest collapse inside itself. He staggered back, hitting the cold iron of the gate, his breath ragged. Mama's calm stare from the compound cut deeper than a knife. She knew, she had always known, and now she was letting it play out like a stage drama for the neighborhood to watch. Shame rose hot in Cunnel's throat, choking him. The night seemed to mock him. The buzzing generator, the croaking frogs, even the dry wind that slapped his face like insult. Cunnel pressed both hands against the gate, his knuckles whitening, his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. "Ifeoma!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the street. A few neighbors gasped softly from their verandas, their silhouettes frozen like witnesses in a courtroom. On the balcony, Ifeoma's shawl slipped lower, revealing her bare shoulders in the dim light, and the tall, bearded man shifted closer, his arm grazing hers boldly. She turned her face away from Cunnel's cries, her eyes shining with something between guilt and defiance. Mama, still by the bulb, shook her head slowly, her lips curved in a smirk that wasn't kind. Cunnel banged the gate with both fists, his voice cracking into something between a plea and a roar. Betrayal and humiliation twisted together inside him like fire. Then suddenly the tall man stepped fully into the light for the first time. His face, rugged, scar-catching the glow, was unmistakable. Cunnel's heart stuttered. It was Chike, his former friend from university days, the same man he had once trusted with secrets, the same man he had loaned money to when times were hard. "Chike!" Cunnel's voice broke like glass. The neighbors murmured louder, whispers spilling like kerosene. Ifeoma stiffened, her hand frozen at her side. The balcony no longer looked like a hiding place. It was a stage of betrayal with all eyes watching. Mama didn't flinch, her expression only hardened. Like this was the proof she wanted Cunnel to see with his own eyes. The night air grew heavier, pressing down on him, and for the first time, Cunnel felt like the walls of his own house were closing in to suffocate him. The crowd outside the gate grew louder, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some pointed at the balcony, others at him, their eyes wide as though they were watching a Nollywood film come alive. His chest burned as he shouted, his voice cracking, "Nah, my wife be that. Nah, my own wife." The man beside her did not flinch. Instead, he placed his arm firmly around her shoulder, claiming territory like a soldier at war. She trembled, her lips parted, but no word came out. The neighbors gasped, their chatter swelling until it felt like the whole street was shaking. Sweat ran down his face, soaking into his shirt, but he refused to step back. The gate rattled under his fists as if his pain itself could tear the metal apart. The older woman tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest smile, like she had been waiting for this very moment. The woman on the balcony finally moved, her hand brushing the stranger's arm away, but her hesitation was a dagger through her husband's chest. "Baby, it's not what you think," she cried, her voice trembling. But the words fell empty, drowned by the roaring in his ears. The rugged man laughed low, a sound so mocking it cut through the night like a blade. "He never satisfy you a bi?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A collective gasp spread through the crowd below, some women covering their mouths in shock, others shaking their heads in pity. Her face collapsed in shame, her knees nearly buckling under the weight of her secret now thrown into the street. The husband's vision blurred, his knuckles white as he clung to the iron gate, fighting the urge to break through by force. Rage, heartbreak, and humiliation choked him all at once. Then the unexpected happened. The older woman suddenly clapped her hands together, the sound sharp, commanding silence from both balcony and crowd. Her voice rang through the compound, strong and steady. "Since you all want to see truth, then let truth show itself tonight." All eyes turned to her as she raised her chin high, her wrapper catching the wind like a banner. She walked closer to the gate, every step heavy with power, and looked straight into her son-in-law's eyes. "This house no be your own again," she declared, her tone final, like a judge delivering a death sentence. The words slammed into him harder than any fist could, and his knees almost gave way. Behind her, the other man smirked, standing taller, while his wife's face crumbled completely. The night was no longer just betrayal, it was exile. The man's throat tightened as the crowd grew restless, some urging him to fight his way inside. His fists pounded the iron gate, each bang echoing across the compound like thunder, but the padlock stayed firm. The older woman stood rooted near the entrance, her wrapper tied tight, her eyes sharp, her voice cold as stone. "You will not cross this gate tonight," she said, her tone final, unshaken by his desperate banging. He pushed harder, sweat dripping down his back, veins bulging in his neck, but she did not move an inch. Neighbors gasped at her boldness, some whispering that no woman should ever do this to a son-in-law. His chest heaved as his anger burned, yet her silence cut deeper than her words. She was not just blocking him. She was stripping him of his place, right in front of everyone. From the balcony, his wife finally stepped forward, her eyes swollen with tears, her braids falling loose over her shoulders. "Mama, please," she cried, her voice trembling. "Don't do this to him, don't disgrace us like this." But the older woman only raised her hand, silencing her daughter with a single glare. The rugged man smirked, leaning against the balcony rail as if the drama was his stage. "Better man day inside," he shouted down, his words sharp as a knife. The husband's heart dropped, his fists trembling against the gate until his knuckles bled. The crowd roared, some cheering the bold insult, others shouting back in anger, torn between pity and scandal. His wife's tears fell faster, but she stayed frozen in place, caught between shame and fear. The night air grew hotter, heavy with gossip, betrayal, and fire that would not die. Then, in a sudden twist, the mother-in-law stepped closer to the gate, her eyes flashing like steel. She pulled a key from her wrapper, held it up high for the crowd to see, then slipped it deep back into her blouse. "This house is mine tonight," she declared, her voice loud enough to drown the noise of the neighbors. Gasps shot through the crowd, and some women covered their mouths in disbelief. The man staggered backward, staring at her as if lightning had struck him. His wife shook her head in horror, whispering, "Mama, no." But her words were swallowed by the cheers and jeers around. For the first time, his body sagged against the iron gate, his strength draining, the weight of betrayal crushing him. Locked out of his own house, he realized the night had only just begun. Cunnel's legs shook as he stepped back from the gate, the key glinting in Mama's hand like a sword. The neighbors whispered, some pointing, some shaking their heads, their faces a mix of pity and excitement. His wife's eyes searched his face, pleading silently, but the man beside her only grinned, leaning casually against the balcony rail. He felt the heat of anger, humiliation, and helplessness pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The night wind carried the faint smell of suya and dust, mixing with the tension that made every heartbeat thunder in his ears. He wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but every option seemed blocked. Mama's glare held him still, like a lion trapping its prey. His own house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where everyone came to watch his disgrace. "Cunnel, you day weak," Mama said, her voice calm but cutting through the night like a whip. He clenched his fists, jaw tight, refusing to answer. His eyes flicked to Ifioma, who now hid her face behind her hands, trembling. The tall man beside her laughed low, a sound that pierced deeper than Mama's words. "Maybe you should leave," he taunted, leaning closer to the edge of the balcony, eyes glinting with mischief. The neighbors gasped again, murmuring scandal as Cunnel's anger flared hotter. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he stared up, trapped between rage and heartbreak, wondering if he would ever step foot inside his house again. The gate felt heavier with every second, the padlock mocking him silently. Then, a sudden movement caught his eye. A small side door, almost hidden behind the trash heap, stood ajar. A gap he had never noticed before. His heart jumped, a spark of hope igniting in the darkness. He darted toward it, careful not to alert the neighbors or the balcony duo. Mama's voice rang out sharply, "A beg, Cunnel, stay where you day." But he ignored her, slipping through the narrow opening into the shadowy backyard. The smell of damp earth and rotting leaves hit him, but it felt better than standing humiliated outside. He pressed his back against the wall, peeking toward the house. Ifeoma and the tall man had no idea he had found this secret passage. For the first time tonight, he felt a flicker of control, and a plan began forming in his mind. Cunnel's heart raced as he pressed against the damp wall of the backyard, trying to stay unseen. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled his nostrils, but it felt better than the stares and whispers outside the gate. He peeked toward the balcony. His wife's face was pale, eyes wide, and the tall man's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear. The neighbors' murmurs were faint now, replaced by the wind rustling through the trash heap. He clenched his fists, plotting his next move carefully. Mama's shadow stretched across the compound, but she didn't notice him slipping through the hidden passage. For the first time, he felt the night might be his ally. He moved quickly along the side of the house, staying low, listening for footsteps. Each creak of the floorboards above made his heart leap. He could hear his wife whispering to the tall man, and the words made his stomach churn with anger. He rounded the corner to the back door, its lock old and rusty. He hesitated, remembering how Mama had blocked him from every normal entrance. Sweat ran down his back, but determination surged hotter. If he could just get inside, he would confront them both and reclaim his house. Tonight, he wouldn't be humiliated any longer. Just as he reached for the back door, a sudden shout pierced the night. Mama's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Cunnel, I warn you, no step closer." The tall man appeared at the balcony, eyes wide, realizing Cunnel had found another path. Ifeoma's face was a mixture of shock and guilt as she stepped toward the railing, frozen in place. Cunnel's hand gripped the door handle tightly, heart pounding, knowing this was the moment of truth. He would either reclaim his home or be forced out forever. The night air crackled with tension, betrayal, and the promise of scandal as the impossible showdown began. Cunnel's fingers tightened around the rusty back door handle, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The neighbors had gone quiet now, watching as though the whole street was a theater stage. Mama's sharp command echoed, but he pushed forward, the lock creaking under his grip. On the balcony, Ifeoma gasped, one hand over her mouth, while the tall man's face twisted with sudden anger. "He no go enter here," the man shouted, his voice booming over the compound. Cunnel's jaw locked as he shoved the door harder, sweat running into his eyes. The rusty metal groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. Every eye was on him, waiting for what would happen next. Then, with a loud crack, the door swung open, hitting the wall so hard the sound echoed through the night. Gasps filled the air as Cunnel stepped inside, his shoulders squared, his breath sharp and heavy. Mama's face twisted, her eyes flashing fire as she rushed toward him, wrapper swaying violently. "Cunnel, I warn you," she screamed, her voice shaking with fury. He ignored her, his eyes locked on the balcony where Ifeoma and the tall man stood frozen. The crowd outside the compound roared louder, some shouting, "Fight go happen," and others begging for peace. Cunnel's steps were slow but heavy, every stride filled with determination. The night was no longer a stage, it was war ground. Ifeoma's hands shook as she reached for the balcony rail, her voice breaking, Please, Cunnel, stop, she begged, tears streaming down her face. But the tall man pushed her aside, stepping forward with his chest high, eyes burning with challenge. You no be man enough, he spat, his words cutting like a blade. Cunnel stopped in the middle of the compound, glaring up at him, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. Mama stood between them, her face tight with rage, but even she could feel the night slipping out of her control. Neighbors pressed closer to the gates, eager to see what would unfold. Betrayal, pride, and raw anger clashed in the hot Lagos night, and everyone knew something explosive was about to happen. Cunnel's chest rose and fell as he took another step forward, his eyes fixed on the man above. The neighbors gasped louder, some climbing on small stools to get a better view. Mama shouted his name again, her voice breaking, but it sounded small against the thundering noise of the compound. Ifeoma leaned on the rail, tears staining her cheeks, her lips trembling as though she wanted to say something but couldn't. Cunnel's fists shook, and the sweat dripping from his face made him look like a man ready to fight for his life. The tall man smirked from the balcony, tapping his chest as if daring Cunnel to come up. The air was so tense it felt heavy, pressing down on everyone watching. Suddenly, Cunnel grabbed a wooden stool lying by the wall and slammed it against the ground. The loud bang echoed like a gunshot, scattering the night with fear and excitement. Mama rushed forward, gripping his arm, but he pulled free, his eyes burning like fire. Tonight, truth go show, he growled, his voice shaking with rage. Ifeoma cried harder, holding the rail so tight her knuckles turned white. The tall man laughed from above, clapping his hands as though the drama was a show for his amusement. Neighbors screamed louder, some shouting for Cunnel to stop, others urging him on like it was a street fight. Then the unexpected happened. Cunnel dropped the stool and suddenly fell to his knees in the middle of the compound. The whole place went silent, shocked by his move. He lifted his face, his voice breaking, Ifeoma? After everything, not like this you pay me back? His words cut through the noise, heavy and raw, piercing the night air. Mama froze, her mouth open but no words coming out. Ifeoma's body shook with sobs, her tears falling fast as she covered her face. Even the tall man's smirk faded, confusion crossing his eyes. The compound was no longer just noise. It had become the stage for a heartbreak nobody expected. The night was thick with tension as Cunnel stayed on his knees, sweat and dust mixing on his skin. His voice had cracked the air like thunder, leaving silence heavy across the compound. Neighbors who had been shouting a moment ago were now frozen, their mouths open, eyes darting between him and the balcony. Ifeoma's sobs were loud enough for everyone to hear, each one stabbing Cunnel deeper in the chest. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot, glistening with both anger and heartbreak. The tall man above leaned forward, his smirk gone, his jaw tightening like he didn't expect Cunnel to break down in public. Mama stood with her hand on her chest, her wrapper shifting as she breathed hard, her body trembling between anger and guilt. It felt as though the whole compound had paused their breathing, waiting for the next move. And Cunnel's trembling words were still hanging in the air like smoke. Then Mama snapped. Her voice rose like a whip, sharp and loud enough to jolt the crowd back to life. Cunnel, stand up now before you shame yourself more, she shouted, her words cutting with a force that made some neighbors gasp. She stormed toward him, wrapper flying, her eyes blazing as though she wanted to drag him up with her bare hands. But Cunnel didn't move. He stayed low, his body heavy, his eyes fixed on Ifeoma above. Ifeoma's tears kept falling, but her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, torn between guilt and fear. The tall man grabbed her wrist and pulled her away from the balcony rail, holding her close like a prize he wasn't ready to let go. The crowd began to murmur again, their whispers sharp. "Nah true love be this? Or nah pure disgrace? Wetin go happen now?" Lagos night carried every word like fire in dry grass. Then, in a move nobody expected, Cunnel slammed both palms to the ground and rose to his feet, his eyes blazing red. "If not today truth go show, then make everybody see am with their eyes," he shouted, his voice shaking the very air. He took slow steps toward the staircase that led to the balcony, each step like a drumbeat echoing through the compound. Mama rushed to block him, but neighbors quickly held her back, their excitement stronger than their pity. Ifeoma screamed, "Cunnel, please!" But her voice was drowned by the neighbors chanting louder, "Leave am! Leave am! Let him climb!" The tall man grinned again, spreading his arms wide as though welcoming the storm. Cunnel's hand gripped the rusty rail of the staircase, sweat dripping down his face, every muscle in his body tight. That night, the house was no longer his home. It was the battlefield of love, betrayal, and pride. Cunnel's grip on the staircase rail was like iron, his knuckles white, veins standing out on his arms. The neighbors pressed closer against the gate, their murmurs rising into shouts of, "He go fight," and "Walla don starto." Mama thrashed against the hands holding her back, her wrapper slipping from one shoulder as she screamed, "Cunnel, don't disgrace yourself. Don't climb." But her voice was swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Ifeoma bent over the balcony rail, tears dripping into the dust below, her body shaking like a leaf in harmattan wind. The tall man tightened his grip around her waist, pulling her away from the edge, but his eyes never left Cunnel's. Sweat ran down Cunnel's temples, dripping to the ground as he planted one foot on the first stair. His chest rose and fell like a drumbeat, and in that moment, the compound felt like a boxing ring lit by one bulb. Everyone could taste the scandal. Mama's rage burst out in words sharper than knives. "You think you be man? You no fit keep your wife, and now you want fight for crowd." She spat, her voice cracking from fury. Her words hit Cunnel like stones, but instead of stopping, his steps became heavier, louder, as he climbed each stair. The neighbors screamed louder, the noise so thick it shook the air. Ifeoma screamed his name, stretching her hand out, but the tall man yanked her back, wrapping an arm around her like a cage. "Leave her!" Cunnel bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder through the compound. His face twisted, pain and anger mixing until he looked like a man possessed. Mama struggled harder, clawing at the neighbors holding her, her eyes wide with fear that her secret might finally spill. But the more she fought, the more the crowd sensed something deeper was hidden, and their whispers spread fast like harmattan fire. By the time Cunnel reached the last step, silence swallowed the compound once again. He stood face to face with the tall man, their eyes locked in a stare that felt like war drums colliding. Ifeoma stood between them, trembling, her hands pressed against her chest, her tears endless. The tall man smirked again, lowering his voice just enough for Cunnel to hear. "She no be yours anymore." The words burned like acid, and Cunnel's fist clenched so hard it trembled. But before he could strike, Ifeoma suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Her voice cracked, raw with truth, shaking everyone's bones. She turned to her mother below, her lips quivering as she screamed, "Mama, tell him the truth. Tell him before I die here tonight." Gasps swept through the crowd, their bodies leaning forward like a single wave. Mama froze mid-struggle, her face pale under the dim compound light. For the first time, fear, not anger, covered her face. The compound was dead silent as Ifeoma's scream cut through the night. Her voice cracked like glass, begging her mother to speak, her tears falling like rain. Mama stood frozen, her chest heaving, eyes darting between Cunnel on the balcony and the neighbors below. For the first time, the anger in her face melted into fear, her hands trembling as she clutched her wrapper. Cunnel's fists stayed clenched, his jaw locked tight, but his eyes were burning holes into her, desperate for answers. "Mama, tell me say na lie," he said in a low voice that carried across the compound. The tall man folded his arms, leaning back with a sly grin, his confidence like oil feeding fire. Neighbors whispered, pressing closer, hungry for scandal. Ifeoma fell to her knees on the balcony, wailing, her braids falling over her face. Everyone could sense it. The night was about to explode. Mama finally broke. Her voice was shaky, heavy like a confession dragged out of her chest. "Cunnel, forgive me," she cried, tears running down her cheeks for the first time that night. She pointed at the tall man, her lips trembling. That man. He is your wife's real father. The compound erupted in gasps, shouts, and cries of Yezu. Neighbors clutched their heads. Women slapped their thighs in shock. Men muttered curses under their breath. Cunnel staggered back a step, his face going pale, sweat dripping as though his whole body had turned weak. Ifeoma's scream shook the balcony as she turned on her mother, fists pounding the rail. "Mama, you ruined my life," she wailed, collapsing onto the floor in sobs. The tall man smirked wider, pride shining in his eyes, as though the secret was his victory all along. Cunnel's body trembled, his hands gripping the rusty rail to keep from falling. His whole world spun, betrayal hitting him like a storm. His wife's lover, his enemy, was her own blood. "You mean, I dare fight my own father-in-law?" he shouted, his voice breaking, echoing across the compound. Mama sobbed harder, dropping to her knees, her wrapper soaked with tears. Ifeoma crawled to the edge of the balcony, her face swollen with grief, screaming apologies toward Cunnel. But he only shook his head, his eyes full of pain that cut deeper than any wound. Neighbors began pulling back, some whispering, some shaking their heads, their hunger for drama fading into pity. Cunnel turned away, climbing down the stairs slowly, each step heavy, like carrying a coffin on his back. He reached the dusty ground, looked once at the house that was no longer his home, and walked out through the compound gate without another word. The night swallowed him whole, and the scandal lived on in every whisper of Lagos. If the shocking twist shook you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story now and let others feel the heat. What would you do if your own mother-in-law locked you out and the truth spilled like this? Drop your answer in the comments. The wildest one wins bragging rights.